And on the show today, we have Minette Norman, and here is why she is awesome. She's a keynote speaker and the name on the sign for Minette Norman Consulting, LLC, helping leaders create more diverse, equitable, inclusive workplaces. For that, she was the VP of Engineering Practice at Autodesk, helping their culture get more inclusive. And she's the co-author of the new book, The Psychological Safety Playbook, Lead More Powerful by Being More Human. And get this, she has another book on the way called The Boldly Inclusive Leader, and that's coming out in August of 2023. Hello, Minette.
Hello there, Russell. And can I just correct the name of the book?
Please do.
It's the Psychological Safety Playbook, not psychology.
But I'm literally looking at the word psychology safety. It's said in my head. The book's right beside you. I'm sprouting my blonde hair better than I possibly could. So for those listening in the back, the Psychological Safety Playbook, which is the topic of the damn episode. I should have gotten that right. Lead more powerfully by being more human. So I think we've said it enough times now people get it. So let's start off. Thanks for correcting me. I appreciate that. What's your best or worst employee experience while I deal with my shame?
Don't have any shame. We're human, right? We're all human.
Fair.
Okay, so that question has an or in it, the best or worst, and I'm going to answer it with an and. I hope you don't mind, because
Not at all.
the best kind of goes into the worst and leads me to where I am today, and I feel like it's a continuous story. So the best moment of my career was really in that job that you just mentioned. I was VP of Engineering at Autodesk. I had a really huge mandate, which was to change the way we developed software, and I realized it was not about technology, it was about people and culture and how we worked. And so I had this amazing ride, and I would say 4 years of really having a large platform and being able to drive positive change, and I felt like I was at the top of my game. So pinnacle of my career, sort of the apex of 25, 30 years in the software industry.
I hate to do this. We're going to have to restart. There is something shuffling on your side. I think it might be the...
Oh, I'm so sorry. I think it's my cord hitting my mic.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. We're going to have to start
my
over.
mic.
Sorry, for a minute there, I was like, I think I can edit that out. But then it was just getting to be too much.
How about, okay, I've just moved my mic so it's nowhere near my headphone cord. Is that okay?
Perfect. Yes.
Sorry, we'll go back and do that again.
All good. And I'll get the name of the book right. Literally written correctly right here.
So it's always good to do a do-over anyway, right?
I've written psychological safety about 100 times writing the script for this, but no, the idiot still gets it. All right,
we're going to get it right this time. Good. Okay.
Thank you for your patience. And yeah, sorry about that.
No, I'm glad you caught that. I've got my lav mic way over here now, so it should be fine.
That's what it was. Perfect. Okay, cool. And on the show today, we have Minette Norman, and here is why she is awesome. She's a keynote speaker and the name on the sign for Minette Norman Consulting, LLC. What do? Helping leaders create more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplaces. And before that job, she was the VP of Engineering Practice at Autodesk, helping their culture become more inclusive. She's the co-author of the new book, The Psychological Safety Playbook, Lead More Powerful by Being More Human. And if that wasn't enough, she's got another book coming out, which is called The Boldly Inclusive Leader, coming out in August of 2023. Hello, Minette.
Hello, Russell. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And I'm stoked to talk about psychological safety because doing this podcast over the last year and a half, it's been such a part of the DNA of almost every conversation I've had. So to really dig in and even have maybe some tactical suggestions, I'm pretty excited about. But before we do, we got to do our business, which is asking the one question I ask all of my guests, which is, what's your best or worst employee experience?
I'm going to start with a best that goes into a worst, if that's okay.
Do it.
Okay, best. So I had this job that you just mentioned, my last job in tech. I was VP of engineering. I had a really large mandate, which was to transform how we developed software at a 30-year-old company. And I was working on not just technology changes, but really culture changes and helping everyone be more collaborative and listen to one another and be more inclusive and create a psychologically safe workplace. And I felt like I was at the top of my game. And I loved it. And I had that role for about 4 years when all of a sudden my manager, who was really my executive sponsor, left the company. One of my peers took over as my new manager. And of course, it was the one peer that I had not really gotten along well with before. And what happened is he then brought in another manager and moved me down a rung. All of that would have been fine, except that the person that he brought in bullied me. And I experienced bullying for the first time in my career. And it started with just losing some of my responsibilities and having things stripped away, and then having my confidence being stripped away. And ultimately, the final straw was being silenced. I was literally silenced in meetings, like, hand up, do not say another word. And it led me to leave. And it led me to leave a company where I'd spent 20 years and an industry where I'd spent 30 years. And I will tell you that it was pretty devastating. And at the same time, it was just what I needed to figure out what was important to me and what I was going to do next. And that led me to this work because I realized a lot of leaders want to do the right thing. You know, the bullies are the exception rather than the rule. But we aren't trained. I mean, I was never really trained in leadership, and I want to help leaders do better, create better workplaces, and really be more inclusive to everyone so everyone can do their best work.
Thank you for that. Glad such horrible things led to where you are today. Great things.
I am too. I really am.
So I like to start all my podcasts beyond that question, which is around defining things. Now, psychological safety is an interesting one. And looking at your website, you did a great job of, and I want to recite this because you can feel it and you can put yourself in it, which is when we can ask a naive question, propose a wild idea, or share our emotions knowing we will not be embarrassed or marginalized. And again, I love that because everybody can sort of relate to that. But the funny thing is, it's not a very academic answer. Was there a reason behind that?
Yes, there's a very deliberate reason. There's tons of academic research and writing about psychological safety. And of course, most people probably know the work of Amy Edmondson from Harvard, who is Harvard Business School, and she has been researching psychological safety for decades. And, you know, she has actually several definitions, but her, I think, most well known is that psychological safety is the belief that this team is a safe place for interpersonal risk taking. So that takes some interpretation. What does interpersonal risk-taking mean? And so Caroline and I, in trying to make it more accessible, and this is what we were trying to do, is like, we were not going to write the academic work. That's been written, it's been really well done, and it's very well researched. We wanted to bring it down to earth for people to understand what it is, what it feels like, and then how do you increase the level of psychological safety. So we do talk about it as like a belief and a feeling, you know, because she says a belief, but it is also this feeling that I know in this group I can ask that naive question. I can challenge when I disagree with someone. I can not be perfect. I can make a mistake. I can take a risk. And I know that I will not be embarrassed, humiliated, or marginalized. So that's how we talk about it. And I think people can relate to that because most of us have had the experience of not being safe. And hopefully we've also had the experience of when we can feel psychologically safe, what's possible, that we can share our wild ideas and not be afraid of getting embarrassed or just, you know, marginalized for that.
Can it be confused with other things? I mean, with psychological safety, immediately I think of trust, but I also think of leaders using words like safe space, psychological safety, and actually not really knowing what it means, but just saying it because it's on the poster behind them. Do you feel like it's really well understood in organizations?
I think it's very, very commonly misunderstood. To your point, I mean, the thing about trust and psychological safety is they're so closely linked that I don't even feel like we have to go diving into that. We've had that conversation with some people. You know, one differentiator is that psychological safety is seen as a group phenomenon, whereas trust is often between individuals. So that's one way to think about it. But I love what you just said about safe space, because people love to say that. And they even love to say, like, here we are in this meeting. This is a safe place. You can say anything. Safe space. And does anyone believe that? You know, probably not until you've experienced that it truly is safe, because you can say it's a safe space all you want, but until someone has experienced that I can ask that naive question, or I can challenge the groupthink in the room and not be shut down, until you know that's true, you're not going to believe it. So I don't like when people say that this is a safe space, because you haven't proven that it is yet.
And the odd thing too is it's so personalized. So for you and I, a safe space might be very different than, say, somebody else in the room. Or maybe I have a relationship with that leader that does provide me a safe space, but somebody else in the room is like, no, they are not a safe space for me. So that leader might just assume, because they're so good with that one person, that they have this overarching free pass to say safe space. It's such a personalized thing.
Yes, and it is not just the lead. Of course, the leader has an outsized role and sets the tone for the entire group. But the other thing is that every single member of a team can either make or break your sense of psychological safety. So, for example, if we're in a group of 8 people and I'm speaking, and one of my colleagues, may not be my manager, one of my colleagues, sighs and rolls their eyes when I say something, I'm going to feel that I'm not appreciated by that person. That's broken the psychological safety for me, and maybe for others in that room too, because they've just witnessed that. So if I just got embarrassed because someone rolled their eyes when I said something, the next person might feel like, ooh, am I going to be the next victim of that?
How do you know psychological safety exists or doesn't exist within a culture? Say you're a brand new hire, you're coming in and you're sort of gauging the culture of the organization. What are some big red flags and green flags?
I think a lot of it is you're feeling in the room when you first, like, let's say you just joined a company and you're going to your first team meeting. Probably one of the first things you're going to do is observe the dynamics in the room. And one green flag is if everyone in that group speaks kind of in equal percentages, that there aren't a couple people who dominate the conversation and the others who remain silent. If you're witnessing a lot of silence in a group, you can pretty much be sure that there's something going on here that's not super healthy and that isn't safe. Why are these people not speaking up? Most people have ideas. And if they don't feel free to share them, there's something going on there. And so you witness those dynamics. Now, if you see that everyone engages in free dialogue and there is open disagreement, and it's not personal attacks, but it's actually, we're going to debate ideas and we can really have these debates without hurting people's feelings, and we can then get to the best solution, and innovative solutions and new ideas are welcome. That's a pretty good sign of psychological safety, that people talk really openly and share those even half-baked ideas without getting shut down or embarrassed by their peers. So you'll start to feel it out pretty quickly in a group environment.
There will probably be a lot of people listening to going, we weren't even talking about psychological safety 3 years ago, 4 years ago. What changed? Because it is DEI, psychological safety. These are terms that are way more in the populace, much more in usage. Why?
Well, I think that DEI, so it's interesting that you mentioned that, because certainly I was focusing on DEI more than 3 years ago, and others were too. But when it blew up, I will tell you, at least in the US, when it blew up was when George Floyd was murdered. And suddenly, there it was in the news, this horrible thing that had happened, and you could not talk about it. And companies, you noticed probably, after the George Floyd murder, companies started putting out DEI statements. We support Black Lives Matter, we support diversity, equity, inclusion. That was an impetus for bringing DEI to the forefront. And I think that psychological safety is intrinsically linked. My work, as you said, focuses on inclusive cultures. And my belief, and I'm not alone, it's not like I made this up or anything, but my belief is that you cannot create an inclusive culture unless it's built on a foundation of psychological safety. Because if you want to, of course, you want to hire a diverse workforce, because there's so much evidence that that's not only the right thing to do, but you'll also have better results for more diverse thinking. You will not benefit from the talent that you have hired unless everyone feels that they do have a voice and that they are valued for the differences they bring, not for their homogeneity, right?
Yeah.
And so unless people feel that dissenting voice is welcome, or that ill thought out idea that might just lead to something if we fleshed it out is welcome, then they're going to conform to the group norms. And you might as well just have an entirely homogeneous workforce, because the people who feel other, who feel somewhat different, will just try to fit in and mask their differences instead of showing up as who they truly are. So I think you have to build that foundation of psychological safety, which will then enable inclusion and belonging.
Very vital. I mean, you can't, like you said, you can't be creative, you can't be innovative if you're not feeling like you can be honest. But if you're a leader trying to shift a culture and facilitate and foster psychological safety, you've got this amazing playbook. I really kind of want to know, where does it start?
Well, you can start with the first play in the book. No, really, we truly believe that it starts with yourself as a leader and your own self-awareness of your behavior, because people are watching you. You are setting the tone. You are being noticed for not only what your own behavior is, but what behavior you reward and what behavior you punish and what you tolerate. Now, one of the first things that we say is that as a leader, you have to show up sort of as your imperfect human self. And that's why we have that subtitle, Lead More Powerfully by Being More Human. We believe that a leader, the idea is that leaders have to show up as perfect and all-knowing and omnipotent. That model has to go away. That what we need today are leaders who are human, who are willing to share at least some vulnerabilities, and that they can actually open their minds and their hearts to other perspectives. And so the first thing we offer as a suggestion in the playbook is for leaders to start asking the question, what am I missing? Because when you ask that very simple question and you really pause to see if anyone has something to add, you're saying, I am not all-knowing. There's surely something that I have missed, because no one can see everything. We all see things through our own narrow lenses. And I'm open to hearing other perspectives and things that I've missed. That alone is a powerful opener.
Speaking of powerful, and I'm glad you kind of brought it up, which is self-awareness. What is the role of self-awareness in psychological safety? Because when you immediately bring up psychological safety, it's a thought of the other. I have to create an environment. I have to make it psychological safe. But I think a big missing piece is that self-awareness piece.
Totally agree with you, as does Caroline. And we actually talk about becoming bravely self-aware, because self-awareness is hard, right? You don't always know how you show up. And one of the things that we think is so important and why self-awareness is so important is if you are not self-aware, you operate unconsciously and you operate automatically. And that's going to mean that often you let your emotions get the best of you in a public setting and you lash out at someone, you embarrass someone. And it's all because you are not aware of what you are experiencing emotionally, which is going to give you an ability to actually choose your response instead of having an automatic response. And just to make that a little clearer and more concrete, let's say that you're a leader and you're up in front of a room of your staff, or maybe an all hands meeting, and someone asks you a question that challenges you or that puts you on the spot. If you are not self-aware of the fact that you're the leader up in front of a room of people, everyone's watching what you do, you might just lash out and say, like, that's a terrible question, or I'm not going to answer that question, or shut down the person. I have seen that happen. I have been the victim of that. And what happens in the moment is that the person is often completely embarrassed because the leader, the person, the most powerful figure in the room, has made them feel stupid or less than or not valuable. And then everyone else who was there witnessed what happened. And they now say, oh, I'm not going to ask a question. Look what just happened to her or to him. And so the self-awareness piece that comes in is that, okay, here I am, leader in front of the room. I just got a hard question. Take a little pause, take a breath, and realize if you're not careful, you're going to get defensive. And instead, what you can do is you can just thank the person. Thank you for that question. In that moment, you've calmed down your brain. You've gotten out of that automatic fight, flight, freeze defensive response, which is what happens to all of us. And then you can engage in dialogue. Maybe you don't have the answer to the question. Maybe you can ask a follow-up clarifying question, and that gives you time to get your brain basically back online so that you can communicate in a positive way. But I have seen far too many leaders, and honestly, I've done it myself when I was not self-aware, is you just go into that automatic response, and it's often not your best self. It's often your worst self. So that's why becoming aware that yes, we have emotions. We don't leave our emotions when we walk into work or when we turn on our computer for the day. And it's important to become aware of our emotions, and that, I love the work of Susan David on labeling your emotions, because if you can label your emotions, then they don't have as much power over you, and you can decide how you want to respond. And so I think that's really, really important for anyone in a leadership position.
I love the idea as well of voicing vulnerability. I was doing a presentation not too long ago, and it was a bunch of truth bombs about leadership, and I might have said it in the most, here is the mirror kind of a presentation. And there was one leader, the one that actually had invited me to do the talk in front of this executive group, and you could tell she was squirming in her seat. You could tell that there was just this. But what I give her the biggest kudos in the world for was at the end, she's like, "You made me extremely uncomfortable." She said it to the entire room, and then followed up by going, "I really have to sit and understand why I feel that way." And the room opened up after she said that, because they saw her not only being uncomfortable, but that, which psychologically safety wise, they'd be like, doesn't mean she's ready to be psychologically safe. She just is showing her dissatisfaction with the words coming out of my mouth. But for her to voice that opened up the room to some of the most amazing dialogue, and really dug deeper into the topic we were talking about because of how she showed up. It was amazing. So you've you talked about the benefits of it. What happens when an organization decides not to be psychologically safe or resistant to psychological safety? How can it hurt an organization?
I wonder if any organization deliberately chooses not to be. That's interesting. That's an interesting question that I
I
don't think
think
I
they
can
might
answer.
resist change more than anything, like different ways of doing things, or being vulnerable when they've always been raised not to be vulnerable. I think it's more maybe nobody will say, and I agree, nobody will ever say, "I'm not going to be not psychological safe," double negative,
Right.
but they will not want to do things differently than they're comfortable with.
Yes, and that is, well, I mean, that's human nature, right? Like, change is hard, and especially changing our behavior that it's been ingrained, and we may have been doing this the same way for decades, perhaps. So change is hard. I think a lot of it is there's a lot of fear. There's also misunderstanding. There's misunderstanding about what psychological safety is and is not. And so I do run into this fear of, well, if we really work on psychological safety and we have a psychologically safe team, it means that I can't hold people to high performance standards, or accountability is going to fall by the wayside. And that's a misunderstanding, because having a psychologically safe environment does not mean that performance goes down. In fact, it should mean that performance goes up. So I think we have to, one of the things is clarifying what it means and what it doesn't mean. But what I've also seen in terms of behavior change and the resistance to change, is thinking that I have to change everything I do completely, and it's overwhelming. And so leaders can get really overwhelmed with, oh my God, I'm going to do this wrong. There is no perfection. There is no perfect leader. And so we really recommend making small changes. And the idea behind the playbook, because we have 25 ideas or moves in there of things you can do, is try one. Try one thing and see how that works, and practice it. And then if that's not having an impact, try something else and really iterate and learn from what works and make it your own. And the idea is that small changes in your behavior, not reinventing everything you do, but small changes in your behavior as a leader, can make a huge difference. And maybe it is that asking, what am I missing? Maybe it is admitting, I don't have an answer to that. Maybe it's just changing how you listen to someone else, and really showing up when you have your one-on-ones, that you're not going to have your phone out, and you're not going to get distracted, and you're going to ask clarifying questions, and you're going to make sure you've understood the other person before you respond. Those are fairly small things, but they can make a huge difference.
One of the things I love about digging deeper into a topic, like you did with the Psychological Safety Playbook, is you learn more about the topic that you probably didn't know. As you think you know everything, or you think you know a lot, and then you're digging into it, not so much. So when you were co-writing the book with Dr. Helbig,
Helbig, yeah.
What was surprising to you?
Well, a number of things. First of all, we really had this idea of, we knew what we wanted to do. We wanted to provide the how to. And we were looking for information, and it was surprisingly hard to find. We were looking for sources, and we'd find little bits of things here and there. So we had a lot of sort of putting the puzzle together. And we also had a lot of experience ourselves. Now, Caroline, she has a PhD in human genetics, and she was a McKinsey consultant for many years. She has a really rich experience. And then I had a very different experience in tech for 30 years. And I think our combined experiences really informed our work, but we did a lot of reading and research, not original research, a lot of reading to figure out what we might borrow and what we might reference, because what we wanted to do is provide tangible ideas and then give people more material that if they want to dig into empathy, for example, or if they want to dig into growth mindset, we had books and references for people to look at. So I think that I'll tell you the thing that was maybe the most surprising, because that was your question, was we had more material than we could use. Sometimes I was worried that we wouldn't have enough. We ended up leaving out a whole play. We decided we liked this number of 5 plays with 5 moves and 25 total. And we have a 6th play that we started to work on. And then we said, you know what? Let's just save that. It's not the last time we're going to work on something together. Let's put that one aside. So the surprising thing was just how much we really felt we could share on this topic, and we're not done with it. And so we have this fabulous Miro board, an online whiteboard where we keep all of our ideas. So we have something that Caroline labeled the simmering pot. And in the simmering pot are things that we want to come back to and work on later. So I guess the most surprising thing was that there's lots more, and we have lots more to explore.
So I want to, without going through all the steps of the playbook, but I kind of want to get a tangible idea of a scenario. So for example, feedback. How can you provide a psychologically safe, what are a few things you could do to create a psychological safe space, safe space, damn it, for feedback, to prove that it is a safe space? Damn it. I can't give it, it rolls off the tongue. It's too easy to say.
I know it is. It's one of those sort of cliches that we all know. Well, you kind of preempted our 6th play. That's really funny that you go there, because we decided that we needed to do a whole thing on feedback, because it's so hard both to give and to receive feedback. Yes. And so we've kind of set that aside. But we do have some material in the playbook about feedback. And so I think there are several things. Now, one is, if you're the one giving the feedback, really to make sure that the other person is ready to receive it. And so some of that may be even checking in. I do have some feedback that I'd like to share with you, whether it's positive or negative and constructive. And is this the right time to talk about it? Because people need time to prepare, right? They need to know, I'm about to receive some feedback. Let me get in the right mindset. And if you just slam it at them and surprise them, what's going to happen? They're going to go into that flight, fright, freeze mode of oh my God, I can't even hear this. So prepping someone for it, and then giving them feedback, I would say, and this is something I had to do so much, of course, managing teams for 20 years, is giving feedback in a way that someone can hear it. So not to destroy their morale, but because you want them to be better and because you believe in their potential. I think it's really important that you tell people that explicitly, that this feedback is because I really care about you and that I really know you can do even better than you're doing today. And that's why I'm offering it to you. So to offer it with generosity for the person's benefit and not as something to destroy their morale and make them feel terrible. And so there are lots of, I think there's a lot of, again, the self-awareness is, how am I going to deliver this feedback? And am I in the right frame of mind? Have I thought about it? Is it specific? Is it something that the person's going to be able to do something with, as opposed to it just being general, you're hard to work with? Like, what does that mean, right? So I think that's part of it. One of the things we also include in the book, which I think is just as important, is when you're receiving feedback, it may hit you really hard. Some feedback's going to hit you harder than others. And one of the things that we recommend is acknowledging that when it happens. So if you get a piece of feedback and it hits you in your heart and your gut, to just say, you know what, that just hit me really hard and I'd like a minute to think about it. Or Can we come back to that, because I need to process that? But to acknowledge to the other person, again, there you are, human, showing up that I have feelings and that one hit me kind of hard and I need a little bit of time to digest it. So two things on, the how you give it and how you receive it, to be really thoughtful and mindful about it, and that it is not easy on either side of it. So there's more to come on that, because every time we've talked about this, people want to dig into feedback. I was just doing a workshop this week, and we practiced giving and receiving feedback. And it was so interesting because it was a small team. It was just 6 people. 2 of the people said, after we did it, I said, and it was a very gentle sort of giving feedback. It wasn't anything really scary. But afterwards, I said, so what was that like? Because you've never done that as a team before, to give feedback to everyone and to hear feedback from everyone. And they said, I had butterflies in my stomach. I mean, it's a vulnerable act to get, both to give and to receive feedback. And so I don't think we should minimize that.
It's almost seen, sometimes feedback is considered a conflict. It's considered a situation where it's a difficult conversation, or there's conflict involved, even though people say some feedback is a gift, and a lot of it is, not all of it, but some of it is. But that, I love that you bring it back to communication, because when I went to school for communication, it was all about, it's not only what you say, but how it's understood. And that feels very much the root of, okay, now let's put it in an environment of psychological safety, and we can deliver it properly. So that leads me to a question around degrees. Is there degrees of psychological safety, or is it all or nothing? Is it 0 or you have it? Is it binary, or are there like 15 phases of psychological safety till you get to the, promised land?
It is definitely not binary.
Okay.
It is gradations and shades of gray. Like there is no zero. Well, maybe there's a zero state. There could be, where it's truly, truly just toxic. Maybe that's what it is. A truly toxic place is not safe. But everything else is just a spectrum of psychological safety. Now, I don't know if you know the book by Timothy C. Clark called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. He identifies 4 stages. I don't think it's linear. I happen to disagree that you go 1, 2, 3, 4. And the 4th one is, I think he calls challenger safety. And the first one is inclusion safety. And I forget what the ones in between are. I don't think it goes that way. I think you have sort of waves of ebbs and flows, and things happen to increase psychological safety, and then something may bring it down a little bit. It definitely is not a straight line of we go 4 steps along the way. So I think it's all a spectrum. I think that also, you said this earlier, that everyone experiences things differently, right? And so in a team, I'm just going to go back to that team of 10. If you have a team of 10 and you did a survey, we definitely have a survey tool that Caroline and I got certified in that's based on Amy Edmondson's work. We can run a survey of a team on the level of psychological safety, and you're not going to get the same answer from everybody. It's going to be quite a gamut, because everyone brings their own experiences to the table, and some people are experiencing a high degree of psychological safety while others are feeling like, I don't dare open my mouth. So every single person has their own, of course, their own trauma, their own baggage, their own experiences. And then, of course, when you think about diverse organizations, people from underrepresented groups, people who are not the dominant group, experience things differently than those who are like in the in crowd. And I know what that's like. And so there is no, first of all, there is no linear, that we get along the steps. And also it's not black and white, because everyone's experiencing things differently. I do think there's value. I've only run a few of those surveys. Not that many teams are that interested in getting the data, and that's fine. But it's very interesting, because I remember running a survey for a team, and some people had like almost 100%. We feel so great here. And then there was 1 or 2 people who were way at the bottom. And that's the reality of most teams, is that everyone's having a different experience.
When we were setting up this interview, we had a really interesting sort of chat around one of the diverse areas that doesn't get talked about, which is age, which is generational. So when it comes to generation, psychological safety, I feel like it could be quite different for a Gen Z versus a baby boomer. Have you found that or seen that from your feedback?
I haven't. I'm just thinking about it. I think, and when you actually think about Gen Z in the US, Gen Z everywhere else in the world,
Sorry.
that versus a boomer, and I'm a boomer. Those are almost two extremes in the workplace today in terms of, ages, difference of ages, that people who, I think it's more the people who feel marginalized have a different experience than those who feel like they're right in the dominant group. So maybe that's the difference, but I don't think that it is truly generational as much it is based on your individual experiences.
What are you hoping to happen? You've written a literal playbook on psychological safety. What are you hoping to achieve by creating an actual book for people to take step by step and to try to improve their organizations?
We have a lofty goal. We want to start a movement, and we want to improve workplaces all over the world so that everyone can do their best work and be motivated and engaged and feel fully appreciated for what they can offer. So that's our lofty goal. And the good news is we are seeing both large and small organizations, but it's really interesting in large organizations, approach us and say, we want to order a ton of books and we want to bring you in and we want to figure out how to scale this across a really large organization. So I think there's appetite for it. And we're now trying to figure out, how do we do that? How do we do that when we're two people? We're actually thinking about doing some material that we could then license to organizations that they could use internally. We're not sure where that's going to go, but we really want to have a broad global impact of making the world of work better for everybody.
Before I get to my final question, I'm curious about just how did your love of inclusivity and the importance of inclusivity lead to the psychological safety conversation? Like, where's the linkages for you in that for the workplace?
It was quite personal for me. It was when I was leading engineering and I was doing a lot of work on DEI already. I had been a longtime mentor for the women's ERG at Autodesk. I was doing a lot more work across DEI, across the organization. I was the exec sponsor for the Black Network. I was just getting more and more immersed in that. And as I was learning about inclusion, I was also experiencing in the team I was a part of a lack of psychological safety. And I didn't even know what the term meant. I came across it when I found Amy Edmondson's work. And I realized, oh, this is how people feel marginalized. I'm feeling marginalized. I was one of the only women in the room. I was the oldest person in the room. I was a non-engineer. And I just felt like I don't fit in here. And I don't feel like my voice is always welcome. And I have ideas and I'm not going to speak up. And I'm realizing that's what a lack of inclusion is. And it's also a lack of psychological safety. And so I started reading. Basically, I read everything by Amy Edmondson. I was reading about diversity, equity, inclusion. And that's where I just saw this intrinsic link between the two.
It's interesting. The more authors I get to talk to through this podcast, the more it feels like authors are writing books to have the workplace they wish they had had. So
for sure. For sure. Like, what we learned so much. I spent 30 years in this industry and all these authors who have done all of this stuff. Like, let's just make it better. That's what I want to do at this phase of my career. Like, I have maybe a decade of more work in me and I want to use it for good.
So the last question I ask all of my guests, Minette, which is, what's one simple action people can do right now to improve their relationships at work?
This one's hard for me because I think that all 25 items in our book are useful for that. So I'm just going to pick one because Sure. Why not, right? I think one thing you can do right now in your next encounter is to listen, to understand the other person. And really focus on, am I truly present? Am I truly listening to understand? Am I only interjecting if I need a clarifying question? Am I stopping myself from preparing my response? Am I fully committed to understanding? Honestly, that will change your relationships in a huge way. And it sounds really easy, and it's quite challenging if you haven't practiced being a great listener.
That is Minette Norman. She is a keynote speaker, she is a consultant, and she is the co-author of the new book, The Psychological Safety Playbook, Lead More Powerfully by Being More Human. Thanks for being here, Minette.
Thanks for having me, Russell. It was fun.